Chapter 6. A Dangerous Game. Chloe spent the rest of Saturday in a state of barely controlled panic. Every casual interaction with Mark felt like walking through a minefield. His innocent questions about her day, his gentle touches, even his easy laughter at something on TV became sources of excruciating guilt. She found herself overcompensating, being too attentive, too affectionate, as if she could somehow balance the scales of her betrayal through extra kindness. Sandra, meanwhile, was a master class in restraint. She gave Chloe space, engaging Mark in conversations about his work, complimenting Chloe's cooking, being the perfect house guest. But there were moments, fleeting, electric seconds, when their eyes would meet across the room, and Chloe would see the banked fire there, the promise of what waited for her in the darkness. By Sunday evening, Chloe had made her decision. She couldn't do this anymore. The guilt was eating her alive, and the desire was driving her insane. Something had to give before she completely lost herself. She waited until Mark was engrossed in a documentary about marine life, his attention completely absorbed by the screen, before following Sandra into the kitchen where she was washing the dinner dishes. The domestic scene felt surreal. Sandra, the woman who had whispered the filthiest, most beautiful things in her ear just 2 nights ago, standing at the sink with yellow rubber gloves on her hands like any ordinary roommate. "We need to talk," Chloe said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Sandra didn't turn around, but Chloe saw her shoulders tense slightly. "Do we?" "Yes." Chloe moved closer, close enough to smell Sandra's perfume over the scent of dish soap. "About Friday night, about everything." Sandra rinsed the last plate and turned off the water. She peeled off the gloves with deliberate care, hanging them on the edge of the sink before finally turning to face Chloe. Her expression was carefully neutral, but her eyes were watchful, alert. "What about it?" Chloe took a deep breath, steeling herself. It was a mistake. The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Sandra's face didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes, a flicker of something dark and dangerous. "A mistake," Sandra repeated slowly, as if tasting the words. "Yes." Chloe forced herself to meet Sandra's gaze, to project the confidence she didn't feel. "I love Mark. I'm with Mark. What happened between us? It can't happen again." For a long moment, Sandra said nothing. She simply stared at Chloe with those knowing brown eyes, and Chloe felt herself beginning to waver under the intensity of that gaze. Finally, Sandra smiled, not the wicked, predatory smirk Chloe had come to both fear and crave, but something softer, almost understanding. "Of course," Sandra said easily, "you're absolutely right. It was just old friends catching up. Alcohol, the excitement of the city. These things happen." She reached out and touched Chloe's arm, a gentle, seemingly innocent gesture. "I'm sorry if I made you uncomfortable. That wasn't my intention." The easy agreement should have been a relief. It should have felt like a weight lifting off Chloe's shoulders. Instead, it left her feeling strangely hollow, almost disappointed. But she pushed that treacherous feeling down, nodding quickly. "Good. Great. I'm glad we understand each other." "We do," Sandra agreed, her smile never wavering. "We understand each other perfectly." Something in her tone made Chloe's skin prickle, but before she could analyze it further, Mark's voice called from the living room. "Hey, you two, come check this out. They're showing how octopi can change colors. It's incredible." Sandra's hand slipped away from Chloe's arm. "We should go," she said pleasantly. "Mark's waiting." For the rest of the evening, Sandra was a picture of propriety. She sat in the armchair, not on the couch next to Chloe, and made appropriate comments about the documentary. When she said goodnight and disappeared into the guest room, she didn't even look back. Chloe should have felt victorious. She'd drawn her line in the sand, and Sandra had respected it. The crisis was over, but as she lay in bed next to Mark that night, listening to his steady breathing, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just made a terrible mistake. Not the kind Sandra had suggested, a mistake of passion and alcohol, but something far more dangerous. She challenged Sandra, and Sandra had accepted that challenge with a smile. The next morning, everything seemed normal. Sandra made coffee, Mark read the news on his tablet, and Chloe prepared for another day of freelance work. It was Monday, routine, safe. Then Sandra handed her the sugar for her coffee. Their fingers touched, A brief, seemingly accidental contact, but Sandra's thumb stroked across Chloe's knuckles with deliberate intent. The touch lasted only a second, but it sent fire racing up Chloe's arm. "Oops," Sandra said with an innocent smile. "Sorry." Throughout the day, it continued. Small touches that could be explained away as accidents or friendly gestures. Sandra's hand on her lower back as she passed behind Chloe's chair, her fingers trailing across Chloe's when she handed her a pen. Her body pressing close when they both reached for something in the refrigerator, the contact lasting just a heartbeat too long to be innocent. Each touch was electric, deliberate, and utterly deniable. If Chloe had tried to confront her, Sandra could have looked at her with wide, innocent eyes and claimed it was all perfectly normal. Just friends being friendly, but Chloe knew better. This was Sandra's answer to her ultimatum. If Chloe wanted to pretend nothing had happened, Sandra would play along, while slowly, methodically driving her insane with wine. The psychological torture continued for 3 days. Sandra would lean over Chloe's shoulder to look at her design work, her breath warm against Chloe's neck. She would sit just a little too close during their evening conversations, her thigh pressing against Chloe's through their clothes. She would touch Chloe's hand while reaching for the remote, her fingers lingering just long enough to make Chloe's pulse race. And through it all, Mark remained blissfully unaware. To him, Sandra was just being affectionate, friendly. He even commented on how well the two women were getting along. "I'm so glad you two reconnected," he said on Wednesday evening, his arm around Chloe as they watched TV. "It's great seeing you happy, babe. You've been so much more relaxed since Sandra moved in." Chloe nearly choked on her wine. Relaxed was the last thing she felt. She was a live wire crackling with tension and unfulfilled desire. Every innocent touch from Sandra left her aching, desperate, ready to crawl out of her own skin. Sandra, sitting in her chair with a book in her lap, looked up at Mark's comment. Her eyes met Chloe's over Mark's head, and that familiar, devastating smirk appeared for just a moment before disappearing. "We've always had a special connection," Sandra said smoothly. "Haven't we, Chloe?" Before Chloe could answer, Mark brightened with an idea that made her blood run cold. "You know what? We should all do something together this weekend. Really celebrate having Sandra here." He turned to Sandra with enthusiasm. "And what do you think about a little getaway? I know this great cabin up in the mountains. It's got a hot tub, hiking trails, the whole 9 yards. Just the three of us, away from the city." Sandra's eyes lit up with delight, but there was something predatory in her expression that made Chloe's stomach drop to her feet. "That sounds absolutely perfect," Sandra purred, her gaze sliding to Chloe. "What do you think, Chloe? Ready for a little adventure in the wilderness?" Chloe felt the trap closing around her like a steel cage. The idea of being trapped in an isolated cabin with Sandra, with no escape, no distractions, no buffer, but Mark's oblivious presence, was both thrilling and terrifying. I don't know if I can get the time off work," she stammered weakly. "Oh, come on," Mark insisted. "You're freelance. You can work anywhere. Besides, when's the last time we had a real vacation? Just a long weekend. It'll be fun." Sandra leaned forward in her chair, her voice warm and encouraging. "I think it's a wonderful idea. Sometimes you need to get away from familiar surroundings to really find yourself." The last two words were spoken with subtle emphasis that only Chloe would catch. Mark was already pulling out his phone. "I'm going to call Dave and see if the cabin's available this weekend. This is going to be great." As Mark wandered into the kitchen to make his call, Sandra rose from her chair with fluid grace. She moved to the couch, settling into the space Mark had just vacated, close enough that Chloe could feel the heat radiating from her body. "A weekend in the mountains," Sandra murmured, her voice low and husky with promise. "Just the three of us. All that fresh air, all that isolation." Her hand came to rest on Chloe's thigh, the same spot she'd touched during the movie, her thumb beginning that slow, maddening caress. "I can hardly wait." Chloe's breath hitched. She should pull away, should maintain the boundaries she'd tried so desperately to establish. But her body betrayed her, leaning into Sandra's touch despite her mind's frantic protest. "Sandra, please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You said you understood." Sandra's smile was sharp, triumphant. Oh, I do understand, darling. I understand that you're fighting a losing battle. I understand that every time I touch you, you melt a little more. And I understand that by the time we come back from this little trip, you're going to stop pretending you don't want this as much as I do. From the kitchen came Mark's voice, cheerful and excited. Great news! The cabin's available Friday through Sunday. This is going to be the best weekend ever. Sandra's hand squeezed Chloe's thigh once, possessively, before she pulled away and called back, How wonderful! I can't wait! But her eyes never left Chloe's face, and in their dark depths, Chloe saw her own doom reflected back at her. The game had begun in earnest now, and Sandra held all the cards.